Hello, brethren. We're going to do our part 3 of our series, Who is Lennox Sam and his Davidian Seventh-day Adventist Church Organization. In this part here, we're going to go over the supplemental belief that he has, that's number 22, and he goes into the discussion of how the antitypical David cannot be Brother Hodoff, nor can it be the shepherd's rod message. So just like we did in part 1 and part 2, we want to look at this closely. We want to examine his supplemental belief to see if it stands against the rod. And so we've put out a presentation here that we hope will clear this issue, just like we tried to clear in the first part and the second part, other issues of his teachings that so far in both of those two presentations we've shown that he's not teaching according to the rod. He's teaching a strange fire doctrine. So let's look at this part 3 right now and go into this and see where we need to closely scrutinize this so-called purported truth that he brings us. We have prayed and we ask that you do the same. Claim the promise of John 16:13, and then you'll be in good hands, and the Lord will guide you into all truth. So let's first start with who does inspiration say will be antitypical King David? Now we know as present truth believers there's kind of a wide difference of opinions. We have some that say, well, it's the Lord, and he's the antitypical King David in the kingdom. We just had a brother do a YouTube presentation, and he was expounding upon this. And so there are some people that say that. And number two, they're saying, and this is the situation with Lennox Sam and his followers, a current present truth believer living amongst us will be that antitypical King David. And of course, as we go into the presentation, it's pointing strictly to Lennox Sam. That's the implications that you get once you understand where he's coming from. Number 3 is Brother Hodoff, and that's probably the most well supported of the opinions. And then number 4, we have unknown. We some of us present truth believers just throw up our hands and say we don't know, and which is a good position to be, because the rod definitely doesn't say for sure who it's going to be. But I think from this study you'll get a good implication of what the rod says about that. Okay, so let's address that first opinion, which is number 1. That's the idea that the Lord is going to be the antitypical King David. And we get the clear answer from Timely Greetings, Volume 2, number 43, page 17. And, of course, you can read this at your leisure, but right there in the middle it says, this, of course, cannot be Christ himself, for inspiration never calls him David, but rather it calls him the Son of David. So we see clearly that the Lord, through his rod message, is saying that he himself will not be the antitypical David. And at the bottom there it says, neither could this promised David be Christ himself. So we can't get too difficulty here in understanding this clear instruction here that it's not our Lord. Okay, so let's go to that supplemental belief, which is number 22 on his list on his website. And that reads, that antitypical David is neither Brother V.T. Hodoff nor the shepherd's rod message, but a man who Christ will send to reign in his stead before his return to reckon with his servants, the Davidians, pursuant to, and then he gives us the references that he uses this as a backup for his beliefs. And that's found track 9, page 43, track 8, page 71, 2TG, page 14 and 17. So we're going to look over each one of these references to see if they really say what Brother Sam is leading us to believe. And of course, like we did in part 1 and part 2, so far, what he's led us to believe isn't really what the rod teaches. So let's see if this still stands with this doctrinal supplemental belief that he professes. Okay, so the first quote that he uses is the track 9, page 43, and it reads, "As ancient David is in his grave, the king here promised must be antitypical David, just as the Elijah of Malachi 4:5 must be an antitypical Elijah. Otherwise, in order to fulfill the prophecies, ancient David must necessarily rise from his grave and ancient Elijah descend from heaven." So we see here that this is simply telling us, brethren, that the obvious fact is that the future King David is not going to be the original King David, because we obviously see that Brother Hodoff is saying the same thing about Elijah. So if we use by reason of logic here, we see that we as present truth believers know that the antitypical Elijah that we are led to believe after studying all the shepherd's rod message is Brother Hodoff. So in this way, we see that just like the original Elijah cannot come and be the antitypical Elijah, the same way this verse is telling us that the original David cannot be the antitypical David. So it must be someone else. So this reference right here proves nothing along his lines that this eliminates Brother Hodoff. Okay, the second quote, and this is where we're really going to get into some hardcore revealing. And we are very familiar with this one, and of course in track 8, page 71, it interprets this for us. We got to keep this in mind. The golden bowl takes all these prophecies and interprets them for us. So when we give a report, our first job is to go through the rod index and find out all that the rod interprets for us. We make a note of this. We make reports, and we make them on sheets of paper. We have them all together like pieces of a puzzle. Then we can put our reports together because we see how inspiration, the rod, interprets them. So let's take a look with that understanding here. As he sent a message after him saying, "We will not have this man to reign over us," the only conclusion admissible is that shortly before his return, Christ shall inform his citizens that he is taking the reins in his own hands to set up his kingdom, and that they, upon hearing the announcement, shall refuse to submit themselves to the one through whom he is to rule. Observe that in the message which they sent after him, his servants did not say, "We will not have you reign over us," but rather, "We will not have this man to reign over us." What they objected to was Christ reigning over them through someone else. Clearly then, before he is coronated, and prior to his return to reckon with his servants, he appoints a man to reign over them in his stead. Whereupon they say to him, by their attitude and stand towards his message, "We will not have this man to reign over us," although this man, as we now see, is antitypical David, the simple means the visible king. So Lennox Sams has taken this quote by inspiration in the rod and using this to say that it cannot be Brother Hodoff. But let's look at this. I want to go back to that again to remind us what he says in the Supplemental Beliefs 22. And I want to look at that red highlighted area. But a man who Christ will send to reign in his stead before his return to reckon with his servants, the Davidians. Okay, so obviously in his supplemental beliefs, Sam is saying that this man is going to be sent in Christ's stead, and is going to be to the Davidians, not to the SDA mothers, but you notice he makes a point to the Davidians. Okay, so now we're going to look at how the rod answers Sam. And we're going to find this first quote, 1 Symbolic Code, number 16, page 5. They are saying by their actions, let me tell you how to teach your message. Testimonies to Ministers, page 476. Notwithstanding that the Spirit of God has forewarned them in the following plain words. There will be those among us who will always want to control the work of God, to dictate even what movements shall be made when the work goes forward under the direction of the angel who joins the third angel in the message to be given to the world. Testimonies to Ministers, page 300. Now look at this underline. This is very important. Those who fall in this temptation and pride of opinion are fulfilling Luke 19:14. At this time, when Christ is taking the reins in his own hands, they are, by their actions, sending a message to him. We will not have this man reign over us. So we see that this has given us a lot of clues, because we know that the message says that when someone comes on the scene, Testimonies to Ministers 475 and 476 strictly applies to the Brother Hot Elijah message. We know that as present truth believers. And the understanding is, at that time, the people will be rejecting Christ's man that is giving a message. So it is not the future time that inspiration places here. It is at the time that Brother Hodoff starts to give this message, because we know Testimonies to Ministers, page 475 and 476, applies to Brother Hodoff's time, to the time where he gave the message. Let me tell you how to teach your message. This is exactly what was fulfilled in Brother Hodoff's time. So we see inspiration making the connection. Luke 19:14 applies to the time when Brother Hodoff was giving the message. So it's very clear here in our first rod reference. Let's go to the next one. The credit for the message in the shepherd's rod, Brother Hodoff simply places it to whom it belongs. And those who would like for Brother Hodoff to place it on himself are not doing it because they love him or because they like to exalt him above themselves, but because they are sanctioning the claims of the voice from beneath which hates God and the revelation of the Word, tempting Brother Hodoff to exalt himself instead of God, blindly deceiving themselves and leading others away from the truth. All because they hate to submit themselves under the rule of Christ now, while he is taking the reins in his own hands. Testimonies and Ministers, page 300. This class of workers Christ prophetically heard saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. Luke 19:14. For further explanation on this reference, see October 1935 number of the Symbolic Code, page 5. And again, this powerful reference can be found to Symbolic Code number 34, page 12. So again, we see the highlighted area where Brother Hodoff is strictly describing his message and him himself being the one of Luke 19:14 that it talks about. Because he says, they hate to submit themselves under the rule of Christ now. Not later, but now, while he is taking the reins in his own hands. So again, we go back to that very good explanation that we showed earlier in the part 2 or 1, I don't remember, but it was how we are to latch on to each and every word of inspiration, because it's very powerful to do this. And so if we remember that word now, we apply the correct context of this situation, brethren. And we see that Brother Hodoff and his message is that man that the Lord foresaw in Luke 19:14. Okay, so this is one other reference that we found. Some will attempt to dictate even what movements shall be made when the work goes forward under the direction of the angel who joins the third angel in the message to be given to the world. Testimonies to Ministers, page 300. Some go still farther by saying to the promised mouthpiece of God, you are too earnest. You do not interpret the scriptures in the proper way. Let me tell you how to teach your message. Testimonies to Ministers, page 475. Let's stop right there. Again, inspiration points to us that the well-known Testimonies to Ministers, page 475 and 476, is pointing to one promised mouthpiece of God. So you brethren who are following Lennox Sam, you now have to make a decision. You have to throw out all the long-term beliefs of our present truth believers that Testimonies to Ministers, page 475 and 76, did not point to Brother Hoff, but pointed to Lennox Sam. You are standing on quicksand, brethren, if you believe this. This is very clear. It's talking about Brother Hoff. So let's make sure we're grounded in the truth. Okay, it says further, others, though not so dictatorial, will not submit themselves to the leadership of God. For Jesus foresaw the class that hated him and sent a message after him saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. Therefore, because of their insubordination, Jesus has plainly told that at his appearing he shall command his servants, saying, but those mine enemies, which shall not stand, which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. Luke 19:27. This can be found in 4 Symbolic Code number 1012, page 7. So again, we have preponderance of evidence again of the rod, not Lennox Sam, but the rod interpreting Luke 9:14 for us. Very clear, brother. Okay, so let's go to the third reference that he uses for his ideas. Ezekiel 34:23 and 24. And I will set up one shepherd over them, and he shall feed them, even my servant David. He shall feed them, and he shall be their shepherd. And I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David, a prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken it. The self-centered shepherds, against whom the prophet is told to write, are to be replaced by one shepherd, David. When this takes place, God's people will then have but one shepherd. This, of course, cannot be Christ himself, for inspiration never calls him David, but rather calls him the son of David. Since God's people have always had and still do have many shepherds, the truth stands out as clear as crystal that the David of verses 23 and 24 is yet to come. And the shepherds whom inspiration addresses are in particular those whom David is to succeed. So why we brought this up and why Sam, I believe, brings this up is because we see that in this reference, number 3, it definitely says, it's crystal clear that David of verses 23 and 24 is yet to come. So this is a obvious attempt to say that it could not be Brother Hoff, because Brother Hoff said that David is yet to come. Well, it is very true that David is yet to come. Brother Hoff's time, right then, at the beginning of the message, was as the shepherd. As in the type, David was first a shepherd. Then he became antitypical David. And we'll see when this antitypical David appears. Okay, so the rod answers Sam's third false idea. Ezekiel then was not given a vision of the shepherds in his day, nor of those before his day, but the shepherds after his day, the day in which God raises up this antitypical David to feed his hungry and neglected flock. God's people shall no longer serve strangers, but they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them. Jeremiah 39. So, this is pretty clear, brethren, that at the time that antitypical David is going to come on the scene and do his work, it's going to be a time when God will raise him up. And it'll be a time when no more will the people of God be serving strangers. But we know right now that yes, God's people are still serving strangers. We're in the land of Assyria. We're in the land of Gentiles. So this cannot be where the time is that antitypical King David will appear. But he is yet to come, as the message tells us. Okay, so we have some more references of concerning this time. Having abode many days without a king, their lot from the days of their captivity in Babylon, even to this very day, the children of Israel shall afterward, sometime in the future, says the Scriptures, return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and shall fear the Lord and his goodness in the latter days. Hosea 3, verse 4 and 5. But as David, the king of ancient Israel, has been dead for many years when this prophecy was made, and it has never been fulfilled, he was the type of the David to come. Accordingly, it is those who fear the Lord and his goodness, the Christian Israelites, in the latter days, our time, who shall appoint one head or king, the antitypical David. So what I like about this verse here is we notice that we highlighted return. So we see that this is the time when the saints of God return to the land. And then they will seek the Lord their God and David their king. David applies strictly to the kingdom. Antitypical David will be, at that time, the antitypical David in his serving and reigning. When is the time of reign of the antitypical King David? And then we have this verse, quote, track 8, page 80 to 81. For it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck, and I will burst thy bonds. And strangers no more serve themselves of him, but they shall serve the Lord their God, and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them. Jeremiah 30, verse 8 and 9. Now, as we mentioned before, let's see how the rod, one of the golden pipes, interprets this. This prophecy, we observe, did not meet its fulfillment in the return of the Jews from their captivity in ancient Babylon, because at that time God did not raise up David their king. They did not, in fact, have any king at all of their own, but were under Medo-Persian rule. The prophecy, therefore, can be applied to no other time than today, when both Israel and Judah shall be joined into one great kingdom, established in everlasting righteousness. Then they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, says the Lord. Consequently, the fact that there has never been a time from the day that this scripture was written, even to the present day, that any one of God's people, as a church or a nation, has known the Lord and kept his commandments, again proves that the fulfillment of the second covenant, of which Exodus movement was a type, is yet future. So again, we have great preponderance of evidence that this time when they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king will be in the kingdom, when Israel and Judah are one great kingdom. Okay, so let's go to the last reference that he uses to discount Brother Hodoff as the antitypical King David. And it says, let us not fool ourselves any longer. God cannot be mocked. He will not forever forsake his sheep. Neither will he forever retain untrustworthy shepherds herding his sheep. He will soon discharge them and will demand that they give an account for their unfaithfulness. So it is that what a multitude of shepherds have failed to do, one shepherd, even David, will in God's hands get done. 2TG number 14, page 17. Okay, so the next verses are very clear in context what this quote means. And that's quote in Ezekiel 34:13. And I will bring them out from the people and gather them from the countries, and will bring them to their own land, and feed them upon the mountains of Israel by the rivers, and in all the inhabited places of the country. In the days that this antitypical David gathers his flock from all the countries where they have been scattered, and brings them into their own land. God will no longer leave them in the mountains and hills of the Gentiles. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together and appoint themselves one head. And they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Let's remember that one right there. And they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Afterward shall the children of Israel return, and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and shall fear the Lord and his goodness in the latter days. Hosea 1, verse 11, and chapter 3, verse 5. So now we get to the crux of the study. The rod identifies antitypical King David. And here we have it. Moreover, speaking of this ingathering time of both kingdoms, the prophet Hosea writes thus: Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together and appoint themselves one head, and they shall come out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Who does the rod say is Jezreel? And we have our answer. Also, if you know of other open-minded, free-thinking, truth-seeking brethren, I shall appreciate your mentioning how many, and if they wish you may send in their names and addresses, either for our mailing list or for a private interview, or both. You may address me, V.H. Jezreel, H.B., Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas. Jezreel letter number 1, page 8. Now, brethren, very, very clear. Let those with eyes see clearly what the Lord saith. He says, great shall be the day of Jezreel. And who is that? There's no other than antitypical King David. And we see that Brother Hadif identifies himself as Jezreel. And we have another one just to confirm the same thought. Through this simple, expedient, unfamiliar name, heaven disarms the opposition, secures a welcome reception for the recruiter, the voice of Jezreel, and thereby enables it to survive the wastebasket and stove, and thus to reach minds confused by falsehood and hearts hardened by prejudice. Thanks to this means of victory over Satan's conspiracy, not only the elect, but even the whole earth as well, shall hear Jezreel. And great, therefore, shall be the day of Jezreel. Hosea 2, verse 22, and 1, verse 11. A detailed exposition of Hosea's entire prophecy can be secured upon request. And this reference can be found in White House Recruiter, page 64 and 65. So we've come to the conclusion of our last part 3 of the series here. And we want to give this warning because the Lord has impressed upon us to make sure that any present truth believer know what the following really means. One's only safety will be in the teaching of Elijah, for there will be no other voice of timely truth and authority to whom one may turn. Any others will lead their victims blindfolded into perdition. And that, of course, is the well-known reference found in General Conference Special, page 8. So we conclude our study by warning you, brethren, that if you're a Lennox follower, please take heed of these reports and see for yourself what the truth is. Deception, brethren. You cannot be following deception. And a voice, unfortunately, is coming on the scene. And if you follow it, you should be blindfolded into perdition. For further studies, you can contact us at our email, palmguy@dc.rr.com, or join us on our Facebook group, Truth Tellers. So we once again thank you for joining us, and may God continue to guide you into all truth. John 16:13. God bless.